Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Small, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Gesshoo, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Dani.
Small, Chapter 6.
Sarah.
Sarah hummed and shifted under the hand slowly raking down the flat pain of her stomach. This is a nice way to wake up. Tally's soft chuckle was sleep-rasped and sexy and tickled Sarah's stomach as her lips were pressed here and there, under Sarah's left breast, over her ribs, just above her navel, a nip at her hip bone. You haven't woken up yet, and I don't intend to, Sarah said, keeping her eyes firmly closed as she stretched one arm up over her head and let the other hand fall into Tally's silky hair, still damp from the shower they took before bed. Not if it means this will end. Tally nipped a bit harder, this time right at the junction of Sarah's pelvis and thigh, causing a sharp intake of breath. You have a meeting with Petra in an hour. Sarah groaned. Please don't ruin the mood with talk of Petra, Bellwether. The sweet grated laugh that met her ears flooded Sarah's chest with warmth. I was just going to say you should wake up, Tally said, because you have a meeting in an hour, and that doesn't give us much time. Sarah cracked one eye open and lifted her head, chin pressing to her chest as she looked down at the woman burying kisses in the hair between her legs, drawing ever closer. And whatever do you intend to do with me for the next hour, my love? Tally wore nothing but a crisp white sheet currently sloping down her bare back as she kissed and inched lower. She was radiant in the morning light, and Sarah, as she often did of late, felt at once breathless and blessed. Oh, all of your favorite things, for sure, Tally said with a dimpled grin that made Sarah's cunt clench. Goddess, you are a drug, Tally Craven, Sarah said, letting her head fall back onto her pillow again. And you are hopelessly addicted to me, Tally sing-songed, drawing a tired laugh from Sarah's throat. Sarah stroked a hand over Tally's hair. Oh, my love, she said and closed her eyes, took a deep, full breath and sighed. I've never been more hopeful in my very long life. Sarah! The hand shaking her shoulder finally jarred Sarah awake, and she blinked up at the harsh fluorescent lights of the infirmary. They were partly clouded by a blur of auburn, and on the other side, the looming shadow of one of her biddies. Ember, she sighed, still somewhat fogged from the deep sleep the fixers had induced. Your timing is truly horrendous. If you knew what I was dreaming. Petra. Sarah frowned. What? Petra is here, Ember said, and tilted her head towards the curtain that had been pulled back around Sarah's bed for privacy. We've managed to keep her waiting outside the infirmary, but she's insisting on speaking with you. Sarah rolled her eyes. She always insists. It's the Bellwether way, Ember joked. And it wasn't a dream, by the way. Sorry? Sarah's frown returned. I'm a bit hazed still. The dream you were having, Ember said. It wasn't actually a dream. Lissa said you needed to feel connected to Tally again, so we projected one of your memories into your mind while you slept. Oh, I personally would have chosen something less sensual in nature, but once Yarrow got involved in the selection, it was really rather pointless to try to argue, Ember said. We at least agreed not to go with her first pick. The encounter you and Tally had in the training room's equipment closet? Remember that one? Making all of us stand guard outside the door as if that didn't make it extremely obvious what was going on. Not one of your finer moments. I disagree, Sarah chuckled. As I recall, it was some of my finest work. She reached out to squeeze Ember's hand and sent a warm thank you along the link to all her biddies. Though I would thank you all more had you allowed me to actually finish the memory. Blame Petra, not us. I blame everyone, Sarah said, tired smile prodding her lips, for everything. She carefully shifted to sit up as Ember belly laughed. The weight on her chest was just as heavy as it had been all night. The loose, sleeping form of her wee bonded. She brushed Tally's wild hair away from her own face, then resituated the sleeping girl beside her on the bed. That was when she noticed Tally's naked arms and chest. In fact, the entirety of Tally's body was exposed, but for the small orange panties blessedly covering her behind. Sarah frowned. Why is she naked? She woke up a few hours ago saying she was hot, Ember explained. The fixer said that was normal with the salva overdose. We were going to use a cooling seat on her, but she was naked before any of us could even react. The girl strips quickly. Yes, well, Tara said with a tired rasp of a laugh. At least some things have remained the same. Ember wrinkled her nose but laughed. Sarah, honestly. Please tell me someone retrieved a fresh uniform, Sarah said, rubbing at one sleep sticky eye. I refuse to speak to Petra while wearing this insipid gown. Alice went around dawn, Ember said with a nod. She brought a fresh set of clothes for Tally as well. Sarah sighed, relieved. A blessing on all of you, truly, she said. I would be a wreck without you. Obvi. Lisha's voice slipped in along the link, and both Ember and Sarah released a quiet laugh. How is Anacostia? Still sleeping, Ember told her. She woke a few hours ago, sick to her stomach. The fixer said that was normal with the amount of energy expended. They gave her an antiemetic and put her down again. Major Wick said she'll have a report for you as soon as you're ready. Sarah nodded firmly. Well, I suppose I should get dressed then, she said. Petra isn't known for her patience. Another 10 minutes and she will be barging in orders be damned with all the arrogance and flair she believes her name demands. Do you want me to get Tally dressed? Sarah looked down at her soulmate and sighed. No, she said quietly and combed her fingers through a few thick strands of Tally's hair. Let's let her sleep. She needs the rest. Ember nodded and handed over the uniform that had been set aside for Sarah. I'll let Petra know she can come in shortly. Thank you, daughter. As Ember slipped out of the curtained space, Sarah leaned over and nuzzled her nose over Tally's small ear, then back and over her wee witch mark. She placed a gentle kiss there, then dragged herself off the bed to don her uniform and begin another long day. When Petra entered the infirmary, flanked by Abigail and Rael, Sarah had to force herself not to roll her eyes. I wasn't aware this was going to be a social call, Petra. Sorry, ma'am, Abigail said, eyes staring down the curtain behind Sarah as if she had x-ray vision that could show her a whole and healthy Tally on the other side. We heard what happened and, well, we were just worried. Sarah softened and gave an easy nod. She is sleeping, but she is well. And you? Rael asked. Are you all right, ma'am? Sarah couldn't help the affection that slipped into her voice. I am, she said. Thank you for your concern, Rael. She nearly chuckled at the red splotches that appeared on Rael's neck and cheeks. Yeah, for sure, she said, then looked away. I mean, no big deal. And, Anacostia? Yes, Petra chimed. How is Sergeant Quartermain? She will be fine as well, Sarah assured. Everyone merely needs rest. She fixed her eyes on Petra. Which brings us back to your rather early visit. Yes, well, Petra said, never one to apologize, certainly not to Sarah. I wanted to speak with you in the immediate aftermath of the unbinding, but I assumed you might appreciate a few days to adjust. You assumed correctly. But with this recent incident, I thought it best to speak with you directly concerning. Petra paused, gaze darting briefly towards the two soldiers still hovering. Sarah raised one brow. Concerning? Petra cleared her throat and straightened her shoulders, raised her chin. Concerning a temporary transition of authority. A collective hiss from the busy sizzled in the air like heat the moment the words left Petra's lips. But to the woman's credit, she hardly wavered. Only a brief but notable swallow that bobbed her throat. Her shoulders remained straight and her chin high. Sarah held her gaze sharply and could feel every pair of eyes in the room doing much the same, even Abigail's, fixed on Petra as if they half expected the woman to be scorched down to a burned spot on the infirmary floor by little more than a twitch of Sarah's lip. Sarah, however, merely held a hand aloft to quiet her biddies. She had known Petra Bellwether all her life, including when the woman was still in Minerva's undoubtedly less than hospitable womb. She knew her down to her bones and blood, and could read her as easily as any tome. She'd known every time Petra was hiding something from her, every attempted grab for power, few of those plans even surviving their infancy. She'd also known Petra's sincerity. Those moments of bellwether could surely label as weakness, but that Sarah found so refreshing, if fleeting. Petra, though brilliant in so many ways, had never been particularly skilled at empathy. She'd been born and bred for battle, for glory, and the woman she grew into wore that fact like armor with pride. But there were moments, little tells. Sarah had seen all their iterations over the years. Moments when the bellwether in her faded to the back, leaving only Petra at the fore. A woman who could, when she so chose, be simply that, a woman, a person, someone who cared. Cared about Sarah Alder, even if she'd rather die than ever admit it. Though she'd certainly been kinder since the revelation of Sarah and Tally's connection. Such a rare bond was a profound blessing, one the goddess would surely never give to someone undeserving. Among their kind and culture, it was an inarguable sign of divine favor. Perhaps, blessedly, it had dulled or even destroyed Petra's doubt of Sarah's leadership. Petra was as solid as ever under Sarah's silent, continued, unblinking stare. Abigail was practically squirming behind her. Rael wasn't faring much better, and Sarah could hear the biddies in her head now chuckling and taking bets on how long Sarah could keep this up before someone buckled under the pressure, apologized for simply existing in her presence, and slinked their scorned butts back out of the room. Sarah couldn't help herself. She let it go on, let it linger. She always garnered a bit of joy and amusement from watching others squirm and shrink in her presence, especially those who tended toward inflated egos outside of it, little pleasures and such. But at the end of the day, this day that had only just begun, and the one before, and even the one before that, Sarah was tired. She was exhausted. And above all, she was scared. She'd never planned on having a mate, let alone a bonded. Love had never been in the cards for her. Connection beyond what she shared with her biddies was rare and evanescent. But now she had a lover, partner, soulmate, a very best friend. A closer, deeper connection than she ever would have dreamed possible, especially after 300 years of the ebb and flow of loneliness. And oh, how quickly she settled into that reality. how eagerly she'd taken it in both hands and held on. A blessing she wasn't certain she deserved, but that she cherished beyond what any language, spoken or otherwise, could ever possibly convey. And now? Now that connection was threatened. It was strained. It was exhausting. Her lover, her partner, her soulmate, her very best friend, had made a sacrifice for her that cost them both dearly. And Sarah was lost in the aftermath. She was concerned, constant worry that never let her breathe. What would Tally get into next? How could she harm herself or others while in this state? What would happen if they couldn't return her to her true self? How could Sarah care for her like this? How could she keep her close, keep her safe? How could she? Goddess, she was so very tired. A heavy sigh heaved free unbidden, and Sarah heard it. The resignation she felt in her gut caught in the breathy melody of it. Petra, she said, this once I believe. My Sarah? Sarah's words stalled in her throat as the large curtain behind her screeched open, and a ball of wild tangled hair and naked toddler came wobbling out into the room. Tally, in only her panties, rubbed at her sleepy, only partially open eyes as she made blindly for Sarah. She collided with Sarah's leg and wriggled one hand between them so she could loop her arm around Sarah's thigh and lean against her. Sarah adjusted without a word, one hand sliding down to cup the back of Tally's head, gently scratching at her scalp. Her eyes took in the quick flash reactions of the three women opposite her. Abigail's subtle relief at seeing Tally alive and well before her prior discomfort slipped back in. Rael's amused, adoring smile, something Sarah recognized as familial, loving. And finally Petra, whose own eyes blew comically wide as she took in the small girl attached to her commanding officer. Goddess protect, she muttered under her breath. Sarah nodded once. Indeed. Hearing the result was one thing, Petra said with a choked, gobsmacked laugh. But she really is a child again. Her voice seemed to jar Tally further awake, and the little girl blinked up at her for a moment before her own small eyes bulged. Her lips spread around a shy smile as her cheeks reddened and dimpled, and she partially hid her face with Sarah's hip. Hi, Petwa. Petwa, Rael whispered, elbowing Abigail in the side. That's almost better than Aggie. They are both horrendous, Abigail said with a sharp roll of her eyes. Honestly, Collar, get your aching womb under control. Can't help it, Rael said. Look at her sleepy little face. I generally cannot stand you right now. Petra, ignoring them both, simply blinked and blinked as if she'd just been thumped or smacked, shaken into a reality she couldn't quite fathom or adjust to, which Sarah honestly understood. Finally, she stuttered out her reply. Hello, Tally. Sarah glanced down in time to see Tally's sweet blush deepen. Her little fingers curled harder into the material of Sarah's pants, and a quiet giggle slipped from her puffy lips. Hi, Petwa, she murmured again, then giggled even harder and bowed her head to smash her face into Sarah's thigh. Oh, my goddess. Abigail's gaze darted back and forth between Tally and her mother. No. Petra turned toward her, one brow quirked. Abigail, what is it? I think maybe Tally has a little crush on you, General, Rael said with a ridiculous grin, and Abigail groaned. As if it wasn't bad enough that our sister is a toddler, she said, now she's all moony-eyed over my mom, too? I. Petra's face was an, admittedly, hilarious amalgam of expressions. No, she said as her gaze fixed on Tally again. Don't be ridiculous. Sarah sighed heavily again as the biddies' collective laughter sounded in her head. Yarrow, you have truly done me a disservice, she sent along the link. To have my own bonded fawning over Petra Bellwether, of all witches, is an indignity I should not have to suffer. Sorry, Yarrow sent back, sounding only slightly sorry. Then, she fine, though. She really is, Lisha agreed. It's not ridiculous, Rael laughed. Look at her face. She's blushing so hard. Tally's face was cherry red as she tried to hide it with Sarah's thigh. With one hand, she pulled her hair over her cheek to help obscure her eyes. Am not. Aw, Tals, Rael said. It's okay. I was only teasing. I don't like that, Tally grumbled, the sound muffled by the material of Sarah's pants. Nor do I, Sarah agreed, and fixed Rael with a stern stare. She reveled in the slight bit of amusement that sparked at Rael's lightning-quick turn towards contrition. Her smile tamed instantly, and the biddies chuckled inside Sarah's head. She turned back to Petra. However, I can admit they are not off the mark. The strangled sound that half honked, half wheezed from Petra's throat made the admission mostly worth it. Sarah had to bite her tongue to keep from laughing. But then Petra's shocked expression quickly leveled into something Sarah absolutely recognized as smug, and she loathed her choice, to be honest. Well, Petra said, and to her credit, she at least attempted to keep herself from smiling. That is sweet. It is a consequence, actually, Sarah said, unable to stop herself from sucking the wind from Petra's smug little sails. During Isadora's examination, it was discovered that my soul bond with Tally and the link that I share with my biddies have become entangled. As such, Tally is experiencing both physical and psychological traits, belonging not only to me, but to my biddies as well. Her clear admiration of you, and subsequently of Abigail as well, is one such trait, thus, a consequence of our current predicament. But Abigail's brow furrowed even as Petra's tipped up in surprise. Does that mean you? Absolutely not. Abigail nodded, clearly relieved. But then who has? Ah, yes, that would be Yarrow, Sarah said, feeling not even an ounce of remorse for calling that old woman out. She wasn't about to allow Petra Bellwether to think, even for a moment, that her goddess given and blessed soulmate was anywhere in the vicinity of truly, actually attracted to anyone other than Sarah fucking Alder. Even if she was. Because, admittedly, Petra was very pretty. Yarrow choked loudly on nothing but air, and Sarah almost felt bad, but didn't. You really went there, Yarrow groaned down the link, and Sarah could feel the other biddies mentally patting her on the back. It had to be done, Yar, Ember said. It was a matter of pride. And now I have none, Yarrow said, and Kate chuckled. We're all soul bound to a baby, she said. I think the collective pride pool is pretty shallow at this point. I'm 5, Tally's indignant voice spilled loudly through the link, and Sarah had to stop herself from physically jolting. Sorry, Tally, Kate quickly corrected, and Sarah could feel the collective discomfort spilling along the bond. How were they to adjust to a toddler in their heads? How much would they have to censor themselves? How much could Tally hear? How much could she understand? Petra cleared her throat as Abigail and Rael both laughed into their palms behind her. Well, she said, but Sarah wasn't interested in hearing the rest. Her skin was starting to itch with discomfort, and Tally's face was boring a hole through her thigh with as hard as the small creature was pressing. And she was so painfully aware of how tired she was that all she wanted to do was go on vacation. Something she'd done maybe twice in her entire life. both times cut short by matters requiring her immediate presence. Sarah wasn't sure if she even knew what a vacation was or how it was meant to play out, but she knew she needed one. Or rather, she needed Tally. Just Tally. Her Tally. She needed to pull her into her arms and feel her pulling back, holding, squeezing her, reminding her that she was there and safe. She needed time to adjust, to process, to mourn. Goddess, Sarah felt as if she lost something. Her soulmate, her girl, was there, right there at her feet, holding on to her as tightly as the invisible grip around Sarah's heart, sending an ache through the whole of her. But at the same time, Tally felt miles away. She felt unreachable, and Sarah was beginning to feel desperate. Petra, she said before the woman could go on, if we can return to your suggestion, I'd like to accept your offer. Nearly every expression in the room morphed into one of shock, all but Tally's, who remained partially hidden by her hair and Sarah's thigh. Jaws dropped open, brows shot up, eyes bugged. Abigail even audibly choked. You, you would? Petra asked, her tone riddled with disbelief. As I was going to say before, Sarah told her, we may often have our differences. This once, I believe you have no motive other than a sincere concern, if not for me, then for Tally, certainly. It may be some time before we can correct the errors of the unbinding, and if yesterday's accident is any measure, I am clearly out of my depth with how best to cope with and tend to these recent changes. Petra's posture stiffened, and Sarah respected her for her lack of ego in the moment. Her face was devoid of smugness, no smile, no smirk. Instead, she wore an expression Sarah rarely found intended for her, understanding. Anyone would be, General, she said, and Sarah let another sigh ease free. This one was softer, wearier, and Sarah felt it like a burn behind her eyes, a heaviness in her chest. The feeling doubled when Petra held a hand aloft between them. Sarah took it, clasping Petra's forearm tightly. There is more we should discuss concerning Isadora's findings. She glanced to Rael and Abigail. All of us. We haven't any answers yet, but certainly some pressing questions. In the meantime, I will have the paperwork drawn for a temporary transfer of authority and a brief leave, Goddess willing. Goddess willing. She squeezed Sarah's arm tightly. I won't let you down, Sarah. I have no doubt, Sarah said, and found she truly meant it. She inched just the slightest bit forward, hand still gripping Petra's arm, and bowed her head gently inward. She knew, once Petra recovered from the shock of the gesture, she would reciprocate. And of course, she did. Petra leaned in and let her forehead rest against Sarah's, and once again, as if her weariness had grown too heavy to hold inside, Sarah sighed. Thank you, daughter. Petra opened her mouth to speak, but a small hand jutting up into the space between them stopped her. Tally's palm smacked right into the center of Petra's chest and pushed, and Tally let out a small grunt with the effort. No, Petra, she said, nudging the woman again. I like you so much, but you can't have my Sarah. Sarah felt a smile tug at her tired lips. Tally, no one is taking me, she said, but she held on to Petra a little longer, delighting in the ridiculous display of sudden jealousy from her tiny soulmate. Petra, no, Tally whined, clearly irritated that the two women had not let go of one another. She pushed at Petra's chest again, grunting and making zero progress. You already got 3 husbands. Sarah is my husband. A joint cackle split the air, half Rael, half Abigail. I think you mean wife, Tal, Rael said, and Tally's brow dipped for a moment. That's what I said. When pushing at Petra again didn't work, she gave up and quickly tried another tactic, grabbing at Sarah's arm instead and trying to pry it off of Petra's. Sarah, come to Tally! Tally! Sarah started, but Tally was still tugging. I am not. Come to Tally now, Sarah! No one in the room could hold their laugh as Sarah and Petra finally released one another, only for Tally to instantly hold her hands up in a clear show of wanting to be held. Sarah scooped her up and settled her on her hip, and Tally quickly buried her face in her neck. My Sarah, she said, more a grumpy, possessive grumble than anything, and Sarah had rarely felt more inclined to smile. It pressed at her lips with abandon. I cannot wait to tease her for this when she's her again, Rael said, and Abigail nodded. One good thing to come from this mess, she agreed. Endless ammunition. You will, of course, allow her time to adjust before the teasing sets in, I'm sure, Sarah said, voice stern, as she pinned the two girls with her stare. Abigail chuckled, eyes light with mischief. Of course, ma'am. Mm-hmm, Sarah said, one brow ticking up. Now, if you all wouldn't mind clearing out, I have quite a lot to attend to. She nodded to Petra. I will be in touch later today. Petra returned the nod. General. She spun on her heel, shooing her daughters out ahead of her. Bye, Tal! Rael shouted over her shoulder. Love you! I love you way! Tally suddenly screamed back, nearly bursting Sarah's eardrum. Rael's mad laugh, echoing back, somehow soothed the ache. Sarah shook her head as the doors closed behind the three. She rubbed a hand up and down Tally's cold, naked back and hummed into her hair. Let's get you dressed, my love, she said, and Tally squeezed tighter around her. Her arms were looped around Sarah's neck, her face buried under Sarah's jaw. Sarah belongs with Tally, she whispered, her fingers playing with strands of Sarah's hair just at the base of her head. Yes, Sarah said as she carried Tally back to the infirmary bed, her biddies following behind her with whatever they brought to dress her. Yes, she does. Sarah made fast work of her immediate and most pressing concerns, namely, checking in with Major Wick on Anacostia condition and initiating the transfer of authority that would give her time to adjust to her new situation and to dedicate to finding a remedy. Though she'd be damned if she would ever return to the necropolis with young Tally in tow. Isadora would have to come to them. Anacostia was well and stable, though Wick intended to keep her in a sleep for another 3 days to ensure a thorough recovery and rejuvenation. Sarah urged the biddies to remind her each day to swing by for a visit, regardless of the day's unfolding. Even if Anacostia was unconscious, Sarah wanted her to know, on some level, that she wasn't alone. Once everyone recovered from the initial shock of the filing, Sarah's transition and leave decrees went through rather quickly, and in what felt, after 300 years of life, like the blink of an eye, Sarah found herself free of duty. Well, duty to anyone other than the 7 women and one little girl to whom she was bound, and she wasn't quite sure what to do with herself. She'd kept her office and quarters, Petra had her own to act from, so Sarah saw no sense in moving elsewhere for the duration of her leave. Her surroundings were familiar and comfortable, which helped to ease a bit of the madness that had been stressing her since the start of this whole debacle. Constant questions and worry battered at her mind like the incessant miserable weather, muddying her focus and eroding her peace. She would take any small comfort she could get, but still, she hadn't a clue how to fill her days now. Isadora would be doing the lion's share of the research and work, and after years in her company, Sarah knew, regardless of any claim to the contrary, that the woman would rather be left to her own devices to do so. Assistance was a foreign concept to Isadora outside of providing it herself. When engaging in her own work, any offered assistance was silently perceived as an irritating and unnecessary interference. So that left Sarah with nearly unlimited time to babysit, Kate muttered inside her head. Sarah sighed and glanced over at the woman. Kate sat near the gramophone with Alice, both fingering through Sarah's extensive record collection. Alice hummed softly as they did so. You are lucky she's distracted right now, Sarah replied. Otherwise, you may have to suffer another lecture as to how she is not a baby, but a very distinguished and talented 5-year-old. Kate chuckled and looked over her shoulder, gaze darting towards the fireplace where Tally sat utterly entranced. I hope you're not tired, Ophi, because she's never going to let you sleep now, or eat, or pee, or do anything other than this for the rest of your life. Her face is worth it, Ophelia said as Tally's eyes blew wide with wonder. The 3 small cups spread on the table between them were, once again, remarkably empty, and Tally was, once again, remarkably shocked. She squealed as Ophelia revealed the small red ball in her hand. How do you do that? I told you, little doll, Ophelia chuckled. It's magic. Sarah snorted. Far from it. Again, Ophi! Tally squealed and clapped her hands. Again! Or you could perform actual work. Work isn't magic, Sarah, Savannah replied from the sofa, where she sat stretched and relaxed with her feet in Lisha's lap. Tell that to civilians, Sarah said. They're the ones who insist on referring to it as such. She set aside the glass of whiskey she'd been nursing and rose to join them. Regardless of what you call it, it's an actual wonder as opposed to this. She waved her hand over Ophelia's little setup as she settled into an armchair just behind Tally. It's magic, my Sarah! Tally cheered. Look! Sarah rolled her eyes but couldn't help a fond smile. She leaned forward and began collecting Tally's unruly hair in her hands. I see, my love, she said as she gently combed it through with her fingers. Listen to old Grandma Alder preachin', Yarrow teased from her place on the floor, directly beside Ophelia. Witch magic is the only real magic, I tell you. The rest is naught but foul trickery. Chicanery, I say. Be not fooled, children. Look away, look away. The laugh that rumbled in Sarah's chest felt good. It jiggled something loose as it barreled up and out and melted into the surrounding melodies of her biddy's amusement. And something in it, something precious and rare, called to Tally. Because for the first time in nearly an hour, the small girl's attention strayed from the rapidly moving cups in front of her. She was on her bare feet in seconds, her eyes bright as she turned to face Sarah. Her lips were spread in a wide smile, teeth and dimples on display. Sarah's laugh was still singing, softening to its end, when Tally cupped little hands around her cheeks and said, My Sarah, so happy. Sarah sighed, charmed, and leaned into Tally's touch. She took one of Tally's hands from her cheek and brought it to her lips. She then bopped Tally's button nose with the tip of her finger. With you, my love, I always am. Tally's smile somehow widened, tugging at Sarah's chest like a tether. Come do magic, my Sarah? I think I will watch instead, she told her. But I can braid your hair while Ophelia performs for you. How does that sound? Tally squealed. I want an alder braid. An alder braid, huh? Sarah chuckled. I will have to see what I can do. Tally grinned and plopped back into the little pillow she claimed as her seat. And then we get married. Sarah's brows shot up the same time nearly everyone else's did. All the biddies were now pinning her with their collective surprise, and Sarah could only gulp the air like a fish out of water. 2 mentions of marriage in one day, Amber said pointedly, and Sarah's thick swallow ached in her suddenly dry throat. She is 5, she said. Amber pursed her lips. Just saying. She won't be 5 forever, Lisha said, and Sarah at once felt hope and dread. Hope that the words would prove true, dread that they wouldn't. But she is now, Sarah told them all, and she doesn't know what she's saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, Tally sing-songed, and Yarrow snorted. Looks like we're getting hitched, y'all. All of you, please, Sarah said, don't encourage this. You're basically already married, Savannah told her with an easy shrug. With the soul bond, it isn't as if either of you would be with anyone else again, and you'd both rend the world to pieces if threatened with being apart. So, Sarah swallowed again, just as dry, just as achy. Her chest felt heavy. Her head dizzied a bit. She blew out a slow, steadying breath and refocused her attention on Tally's hair. Ophelia was back at her trick, entrancing Tally with each rapid move of the cups. The biddy's amused gaze darted up to meet Sarah's every few seconds. Sarah began avoiding it like the plague as she wove Tally's hair into a single strong braid as similar to her own as she could manage. "You're all ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, only to be laughed and poked at. "And if she brings it up once she's herself again?" Savannah challenged, and the heaviness in Sarah's chest shifted. It lightened. It fluttered like something alive and afraid, something excited. "You know I hate hypotheticals." "That isn't an answer," Kate called, now settled into the seat behind Sarah's desk where she was dealing Alice a hand of cards. Sarah secured Tally's braid with a locking seed, then gently swiped her palm over the top of Tally's head. She bent and pressed a kiss to her crown. "We will cross that bridge should we come to it." "We're totally getting married." Lissa chuckled, and Sarah was halfway to yanking Tally's cushion from under her butt just so she could throw it at the biddy when Isadora's voice crackled to life in her ears. "General!" "I'm off duty, Isadora," Sarah said, and the words felt foreign on her tongue. She couldn't even recall the last time she uttered them. "No need for formalities." "Right," Isadora replied. "Sarah, do we still have access to the Tarim Coven?" Sarah frowned. "One of theirs remains on base," she informed. "The other, the child, is currently in the company of General Sharma. What do you need?" "The child is the Coven elder, yes?" "She is," Sarah confirmed. "Or rather, she possesses the knowledge of their elders. That is what I need." Sarah's frown deepened. "Say more." "I need history, Sarah," Isadora explained. "Older, even, than you." Yarrow snorted out a hard laugh. "Isadora is so cold sometimes." "Very well," Sarah said with a roll of her eyes she hoped was hard enough for Isadora to sense through their open line. "I will see what I can do." "Great," Kate said once the call fizzled to silence. "Now we'll have two children to deal with." "At least Tally is adorable," Lisha said. "Kalita gives me the creeps." "Word," Yarrow agreed with a nod. "She can be as unsettling as she likes if some knowledge that she holds will aid in returning Tally to her natural state," Sarah said. "The problem, rather, is in convincing her to agree to help us. Help me." She sighed heavily and let her chin rest atop Tally's head. She could only hope Kalita would be open to sharing whatever information Isadora believed she may have. She could only hope Kalita actually had said information. And she could only hope the goddess would deem her worthy enough of yet another blessing. One to restore the blessing she and Tally had accidentally botched. Oops. Tally's screech pierced the air again, jarring her once more from her worries. "Bumpy, how do you do that?"
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.